Hello and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where today I break down the TV show Chaotic. And sometimes the TV show isn't the only thing that's chaotic, but today we'll be talking about episode 18, Allmageddon. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in. So, episode summary. Tom and Kaz are tired at the port court and everybody wants to battle a player who's suddenly become unbeatable. Kaz successfully diverts the crowd, securing 4 matches for our 4 friends. Then we get the theme song. The group is excited to battle, but they realize there's a long line. We see Drew, aka Battle Order, beat Clay and a whole line of people, but Drew is too tired to finish the line, so Peyton's match gets postponed, rescheduled, for the morning. So they decide to study and strategize at the trading tables. They deduce that the creature Hotan learned a new super powerful attack, so they port to Param to try to scan this new and improved Hotan. To their horror, they find a decimated town with Hotan attempting to rebuild. So Vidav comes to tell our characters the tale of how this came to be. Hotan wanted to ward off underworld raiders, so he set off to find a way to protect his village. In an ancient, far-off corner of Param, he learned about Allmageddon. When the raiders returned, Hotan used Allmageddon and destroyed everything he was trying to protect. So now Hotan tries to rebuild, rarely pausing for food or rest. When they return to Chaotic, Peyton wins his match with a tricky and precise strategy. And Drew is happy that he has been beaten, because winning isn't fun when you know it will happen. We end on a shot of Vidav helping Hotan rebuild. Analysis. We have a nice story structure here that allows us to gain insight on Hotan's story. The unbeatable player leads us to an investigation where we discover his tale, and then they close out the story with action and strategy and Peyton winning. But they do end on a shot of Vidav and Hotan and a plant sprouting, which really goes to show you they wanted to leave you thinking about Hotan, his story, and the point of the episode. It's similar to the interest episode in some ways, where like they completely stop the story to tell a story of Param and then continue with the chaotic story. But this is done, I think, a little bit more tastefully, if you will. And so I wouldn't call this story of Hotan a parable, so to speak, because they don't really emphasize a lesson learned from this experience, but they do really emphasize that like a tragedy has occurred and that the point of the episode is that sometimes bad things happen, even when you don't want them to. And like you can't control your misfortune, sometimes you just have to sit with it. And there are layers here, so I think we should start by peeling them back to gain a more complex understanding of the story. So, to recap Hotan's story, Hotan was the leader of his village, and underworlders frequently raided and swept through. So, as a leader and a protector, Hotan set off to find a way to protect his village, thus, he learned the attack Allmageddon. Then, when he came to use it, the attack was too powerful, and he destroyed everything he was trying to protect. And, like, that's the story. Boiling that down, Hotan sought power not for revenge, but to protect. He has noble intentions, and I think that's the true tragedy, because, like similar stories go, the character was so driven by revenge that he ended up going too far. But Hotan isn't driven by revenge. He's driven to protect his village. He's a caretaker, and his drive to protect becomes his fatal flaw that he like amasses so much power that it backfires. And but like that noble intention pulls at the heartstrings rather than like, oh, there's something he could have done to prevent this. It's just what he sought after was more powerful than he knew. He was uneducated on the true devastation that Armageddon brings. So there is an element of too much of a good thing ultimately becomes a bad thing in this, of like Hotan's drive to protect ultimately corrupts the intent, like the impact that he has. Like too much a good thing, too much defense becomes decimation. And that's like an interesting point it makes, but it's also so sad. There is this element of loss to the story. Hotan loses what he loves, his community, his home, his joy, and that devastating loss takes a toll on him. He's in like a PTSD shell of a creature, barely stopping for food or rest. Like he's in shock, and he's now fixated on restoring what he once had. He is rejecting the process of grief and he's rejecting processing what happened. He just builds. He just focuses on getting it back, and that like goes to hurt him more. And I think the story also includes children in it. Like they very intentionally show like children throwing a frisbee and then Hotan being like, haha, this is my town. And the inclusion of children, I think, is really deliberate because it emphasizes the loss of innocence and not only like the victims that were lost, but the innocence of the victims that were lost. And also, it takes away Hotan's innocence to a certain extent. Like, not that he was an innocent character, but like having to deal with grief has taken away his optimistic view of the world. And now Hotan has the blood of those kids on his hands. And it ultimately becomes a much more serious subject matter than you initially think that it's going to be. And with Hotan's innocence lost, we also see a transference of the role of caretaker, right? Originally, Hotan was a caretaker of his village. He was a caretaker of, those children and his town. But with Hotan in shock, now Vidav has to step up and take care of Hotan. Now Vidav has to become the caretaker. And so you see that role transfer. And ultimately, this story has a lot of gravity to it, and they never make light of it. Like, it's kind of like that scene in Mulan where it stops being a musical. Like, it just hard cuts, and you see this town decimated, and all of the, like, army men realize the reality of war, like, the devastation it brings. This episode has that energy where they find this town that's decimated, and the group finds the remnants of a town. And they never play his tragedy for laughs. They never like treat it with disrespect. All of the characters hold the story that Vidav tells about Hotan with gravity and weight, and they give Hotan the respect that he deserves. And it truly is like a tragedy. Like in the truest sense of the storytelling medium, it is a tragedy. But the tragedy is like woven as the innards of this sandwich. Like we start with the Drew battle order storyline, but the real meat and potatoes is in the middle. Now, who's eating a meat and potato sandwich? I'm unsure, but they really hold it with such weight and gravity. Now, at the end of Vidov's story, it rains. And I think this is very intentional, and I think it's very purposeful and telling about how the storytellers want us to perceive Hotan's story. Because what is rain a symbol for? Say it with me. Change. My instinct is always to say like rebirth or baptism, but rain it's more general than that. It's about change. It's about washing away the old and bringing in the new. April showers bring May flowers, right? And so there's a duality to rain. It's bitter, it's somber, it's grief, it's moist, it's wet, it's dark. But it's also hopeful. It's showing that at the end of the story, even though Hotan is in this dark place, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's not the clouds get dark and it starts to rain. It was already dark, it starts to rain, and now the sun is about to come out, right? We get this rain that's a symbol for potential growth. And I think the rain really does acknowledge that Hotan's story is a tragedy, but it holds the implication of hope and rebirth in a way that gives us hope for Hotan. Additionally, the last shot is a shot of the plant sprouting, which is another symbol for growth and change and rebirth. Spring will come again. That's from Hadestown. But it's like in Wall-E, you end with the plant in a boot. Here we end with a plant growing, showing that there is potential for this village to become whole again, for them to rebuild, for them to build a new town, a new community, for the potential to heal, right? We also get visual symbolism in Hotan's costume design, and so normally Hotan wears a red cape, but when we meet him, he is building his town and he's wearing a tattered black cloak. Now, the distressing of the cape reflects how Hotan is in distress and how the black is, the color has been removed from Hotan's life, right? He no longer has joy or hope or that caretaker role. He is in shock. The color is removed from his life. His cape has gone black. And the tattering shows how he's in distress. But furthermore than that, black is also a symbol for mourning in American culture, and so black fits this because Hotan is in mourning for his village. He's feeling that grief. So this simple change in the outfit really furthers the story in a way that you might not like pick up on explicitly in the first watch, but it's an example of intentional storytelling that helps to push the narrative and push the story, that as an audience member you're not like, oh, he's wearing a different cloak, but it's something that they're trying to evoke a feeling in you, and Hotan wearing black evokes that cultural awareness that black is a color of mourning, right? It's like an undercurrent that you're not supposed to pick up on, but you're supposed to feel the impact of. And also, I think what's interesting is Hotan wearing the black cloak in Param is a visual distinction from Hotan in the Drome, who's still wearing the red cloak, right? So it's a visual shorthand for these are two different characters, right? The Hotan in red is actually Drew, it's actually Battle Order, it's a player playing the game, versus the real Hotan is now wearing black. So if they just show a shot of Hotan in red, you can immediately associate, oh, right now we're in the Drome, versus if you see the Hotan in black, you can immediately know that this is the real Hotan, the one in Param. There's a visual distinction there that also helps to move the story along. Now, those are some layers of Hotan's story. We got the loss of community and the loss of innocence, how power leads to destruction, the effects of grief, what it means to be a caretaker. All of these very, like, visceral and grounded ideas. And we also get these visual symbols that help to tell the story. And I kind of wonder if the Tale of Hotan has an allegorical nature to it because we have all these symbols, but I can't exactly pinpoint what allegory it is. So I wonder if any of you have thoughts on that. Like, what story are we telling? I'm not sure. But the didactic nature of the story isn't really explicit, but it allows us to ruminate on these concepts. And so I'm gonna throw it to you because I just think like the level of mass destruction parallels something. I just can't put my finger on it at the moment. And we get some explicit themes from this episode, but mainly from the chaotic side of it. Like all of the Hotan story is dark and deep and kind of has these implicit meanings that you're supposed to like weave out of it. But at Chaotic, we get this explicit winning gets boring when you are sure it will happen. And there's a lesson in there too. And that's probably the more child-friendly lesson of the episode is that excitement is in the unknown, or a level playing field yields the most enjoyment, or the fun is in the fight, in the process of trying to win rather than winning itself, right? Kind of all these things you can extrapolate from that sentence of winning gets boring when you're sure it will happen, right? It's the unknown, the the thrill of the battle. It's not the satisfaction that you've won, because if you know you're going to win, you're just fulfilling fate. You're just doing your job rather than having fun and trying something new. And that's like the explicit lesson here. That's my analysis section. So now on to lore. Hotan lore. We get some Hotan lore because it's his story ultimately. And really what's important here is that he lives in a town, a village, if you will, that is near Castle Bodrin. And so to me, when I think near, that must be a relative term because when I saw Castle Bodrin in the Castle Bodrin episode, I remember it being surrounded by sand, right? It was a tower surrounded by sand, and it was near the Mepedian border, right? So we know that Hotan's village is near the Mepedian border, but we don't know how far it is from the Mepedian border. We don't know how far away it is from Castle Bodrin. We just know that it's in a walkable distance. Like they can hike there. And so there must be a forest close to Castle Bodrin, like the sand turns into a jungle at some point. But then also, like, how did the underworld raiders get there if we're close to the overworld Mepedian border? Like, they certainly didn't go through the passage. There has to be an easy way to get from the underworld to the overworld. And it seems like we need to establish a better border here. Like, creatures are really, they're going wherever they want and battling all the time. So why are we not guarding the territories? Like, clearly there's easy ways to navigate between them because, the underworld raiders come up all the time. You had Van Bloot just like show up, and you had Nothalax just like show up. You have Blazer the Spy going down. There's a lot of intermingling, if you will, for tribes that are at odds. But that's what we learn about the village, that it's close to Mepedian territory and it's close to Castle Bodrin, and that there's easy access to the underworld. On to allergies. We get a moment where Kaz mentions that his allergies were triggered in Param, and so we learn that the plants in Param must be pollen based, right? So that's what I'm assuming they're seasonal allergies because it is like kind of a springtime story. And so we either know that the plants in Param are pollen based and work very similarly to the organic materials on Earth, or that just Kaz has some kind of unique allergy that is being triggered. Maybe it's dust, maybe dust is the same, but something is consistent between the real world and Param that would trigger Kaz's allergies in both. We also get a Battledrum Tier Assist name drop, so we add another Codemaster name to our collection. At this point, I think we have 6. I could double check that, but I'm not going to. But, it's always satisfying to hear another Codemaster's name in canon in the series. Now, we also get some interesting angles of the port court at the beginning of this episode. We have new angles of this grand staircase that leads to like the port court rather than like the just general viewing area, the tables. There's some kind of grand staircase that designates those two areas, but between them is a stage. And so that begs some questions for me. Are they doing open mic nights? Is there a chaotic cafe? Drag shows, talent shows, paint and sips. I have big plans for this chaotic event space that we have here. Is there a committee I can join? Or, like, what do we think this is? Do we think the Codemasters do this in their free time? Like, they've made this house a home. There's a performance space in the middle of the port court, in between these two grand staircases. Like, you can't have a stage and not use it, you know? Rock concert maybe, musicians, stand-up comedians, magicians. I think we have real potential here, and I would love to see the community events that Chaotic throws. Um, like they've really made this house a home, and I admire them for that. Now on to trading table, we get some new features for the trading table. We knew that there were battle replay abilities in the drone, but now we get that on the trading tables too. But not only can you replay a battle, you can pause and look at game footage in slow motion and using multiple angles at once, which seems like a really useful feature and also kind of scary how omniscient these cameras are. Like you get the full 360. Now, one other thing I thought about during this episode was I wonder the etiquette around using people's screen names. Because in this episode, everybody calls this kid Drew. He's like, Drew, some skate rat that I beat the other week. Okay, but his screen name is Battle Order. And so I think it's natural for our leads to call each other their names because they're friends, they know each other, like, call each other your name. But they don't really know Drew, but they know that his screen name isn't Drew. They know that it's Battle Order, and his screen name doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. For example, like Sam Shady, people are out here calling Sam Shady because Sam Shady is Sam Shady. You know what I mean? Is Shady his last name? Probably not, but it rolls off the tongue. That's Sam Shady, you know? But like Battle Order doesn't roll off the tongue as well. But I wonder if it is like in degrees of formality. Like in the dromes, you call each other the screen name because like it's a formal event and you're battling. But in real life, like screen names and real names are interchangeable. And I think it might parallel like in real life. We don't call people by their Instagram handles. Like, I don't know. Brittany Broski's real name is Brittany, but Broski's not her last name. So we call her Brittany Broski because that's her that's her screen name. But say Hank Green and John Green, those are their real names. Like we call them Hank Green and John Green, even though their screen names are Crash Course or Vlog Brothers or their community is called Nerdfighteria, right? But we don't call them like, hey, look, it's the Log Brothers. We call them the Green Brothers because those are their names. It's Hank and John Green. So those are just some examples of like in real life we don't really call people by their Instagram handles, but sometimes we do if it's relevant and necessary. So I wonder if it's like that in Chaotic where sometimes you call people their screen names if it's like relevant and necessary. But I also think that it's smart of Drew. He takes all of these battle in the real drones. I have Amazon written down in my spreadsheet. He takes them like that line that our folks were in was in Battledrome Amazon, and he's racking up wins. So like whenever he wants to, he can feel free to challenge the Codemaster because he has more than 7 wins. Now I don't think the Codemaster is going to go out of their way to challenge him because he's using the same strategy every time and like clearly it's beatable, so I don't think it's all that impressive the way in which that he's ranking like racking up wins. But whenever he feels like it, if he feels confident that he wants to battle a Codemaster, like he has all of those wins. So I do think it's really smart of him not to like take these battles in the Betadrome because now his battle record is pretty good. Now on to other notes and fun facts. This is my other notes section. So the first other note I have is this is an editing mistake that I found is when Peyton notes that Hotan's energy is way low, the card shows the number 50, which is not low. Like Tanketh Toborn on any given day has like 35 to 45 energy, but Hotan says he has 50, which I'd say is actually pretty high. Like he's pretty juiced up. And so I think it's an editing mistake that didn't they didn't put a low number there. They didn't like it should have said like 5. But that's a fun other note. There are some character duplicates in the crowd scenes. Like you can actually see Sam Shady running away twice in the same shot. And so they're reusing character puppets that they have for animation just to fill the crowd. I think that's interesting. And it happens with a couple of characters, but Sam Shady is just the one that I noticed and can point out right now. Also, this episode creates hype for an attack card opposed to a creature or location. And like Allmageddon is the true star of this episode, and I think that's a unique aspect to this episode because normally they're gaining hype for a creature or a battle gear, like say the Vile Driver episode. Like that gained hype for the Vile Driver or Castle Bodrin gives you Castle Bodrin. Iron Pillar, is that what it's called? The location that you can't use battle gear at? Like that built type for that location. Or you get Frafto, or like the Borth Majar episode is specifically about Borth Majar. But this episode, although it is Hotan's story, like it doesn't build all that much hype around him. It builds hype up around the attack. Because that's why Drew becomes unbeatable, is because he learned the attack. Not because he like inherently has Hotan. It's about the attack, and I think that's just something unique about this episode. I also do want to mention that this episode gives us a peek into a different social corner of the chaotic universe with the Vidav and Hotan friendship, because they're not the same like social status as the other overworlders that Tom befriends. Like Nadrin and Intrus and Bodil and Maxor and Frafto are all like the ruling class of the overworld. They're all in Maxor's inner circle and like have jobs. Bodil's in charge of the armory. Frafto's, in charge of the Castle Bodrin border patrol. And Intrus is like a warrior. You know what I mean? Like Nadrin is like the high muge. They are the ruling class. They are of the highest status that you can be in the overworld to some extent. And although Hotan is a leader, it's just at a smaller scale. Like he's local government, whereas Maxor is national government. And he's, instead of being a leader of the tribe, he's a leader of a village. And I think that's a notable difference because I don't know, it grounds this story in the more human, in the more everyday, and makes it more relatable. Like, I'm pretty sure Vidav is a musician, or a music wielder, or a strategist. He might be a strategist of some kind, but he's not like of the ruling class. You know, he's just a friend to Hotan, and Hotan is a village leader. And so, I don't know, I think it's interesting to note that. Like, we get similar things in the underworld. Von Blue and Kaor and Takinam are of this ruling class, whereas Kaz hangs out with Hearing, who is, is a spy. He has good hearing. Like, he's in that circle, but he's also more of like a commoner than any of them. He hangs out with Shield in the jump. So, I don't know. I think it's interesting when we get to notate that. And my last thought is this is the second time we've seen the Song of Future Sight to rearrange your future locations, and maybe that's foreshadowing. Maybe it's a strategy that the writers of Chaotic want us to know about. I think the other time we saw it was in the Flux Bobble episode, but they're using kind of consistent strategies so that if you watch the show, you come to understand these cards and their effects. And it's not like a Deus Ex Machina, oh, he just happened to have Future Sight in his deck. I mean, is it convenient? Sometimes, sure. But you come to understand, oh, he used Future Sight. It'll either give you Future Sight or he can use it. There's that ambiguity there. But you come to be familiar with it. And if it shows up again, maybe we'll have to point that out. My final thoughts on this episode are I like this episode a reasonable amount. Like, I think it's structured nicely. I think I really love seeing strategy in battles. And like the strategy that they use here is a bit complex, but they explain it all. And, the action is nice. But the Hotan thing is a bit dark and deep. And even though it is hopeful, it really lets you like ruminate in that tragedy. It really makes you sit in it. Like, although there's symbols for hope, it doesn't show the hope. You know what I mean? And so I think it's interesting the inclusion of it in a children's show. Like, it is palatable for a young audience. They don't like show explicit horror, if you will, but it's a mature thing. And so I think it's a solid episode. I'm not gonna like watch this episode as a comfort watch, but it's good. It brings so much heart and life and complexity and nuance to the chaotic story that and like that's what I love about this show is that it tackles these like complex things. Now, I'm not a huge Hotan fan, like how the Tian episode at the end of Tian, I was like, I root for Tian. Like me and Tian, that's my guy. Now, I'm not like Hotan, that's my guy, but it built hype for the attack. It built hype for Allmageddon, and so now I'm like, Allmageddon, that's super powerful. And that's like chaotic for you. So I like this episode. It's good, it's thought-provoking, it's meaningful, and it's chaotic. So with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.